yesterday's prophecies for today's world.
But greater is he who is in you than he who is in this world. The Holy Spirit dwells in every believer, and he is in you, and you need not be afraid.
And now, Hal Lindsey's Bible study of the book of John.
John chapter 5, verse 1. I call this first section of John chapter 5, Christ's power over human hopelessness. But it begins a new section in John's development in his gospel. From John chapter 1 through the end of John chapter 4, we have what Mr. Tenney says in that book I asked you to get, to read about it, John, the Gospel of Belief. I believe he summarized it very well. The first section, as he said, is the period of consideration. And so during that period, Jesus was being presented, and he was through the various witnesses to him and through his works and things, he was presenting himself to Israel as to who he is. And everyone was considering. There was no hostility at the time. Everybody was considering and evaluating what he said, what he did, and so forth. And it's like, I believe, Nicodemus summarized in John chapter 3. He was the teacher of Israel. He was the greatest teacher in Israel. And he came to Jesus by night, and he said, Master, we know that you must be a teacher who's come from God, for no one can do the miracles that you're doing unless God is with him. So he came to the correct decision as everyone considered Jesus. But he hadn't taken a further step. But now that we come to John chapter 5, and John chapter 5 and chapter 6 will be the period of controversy, the reaction to Jesus' words, to his teachings, and to his claims are now going to heat up. This is the section where Jesus really throws his gauntlet into the arena. And of course, leading the controversy against him are all the religious leaders, virtually all of them. And they stir up the people to be in indecision. But Jesus' purpose in this new period is to force people to evaluate what he's saying, to evaluate what he is doing, and to come to a personal decision about those facts, about him personally. And Jesus will always do this. And even in our life, we go through a period where we hear about him, and there's a period of consideration and so forth. But Jesus will do something to force you to come to a decision about him personally. And that's what he does in this section. As a matter of fact, it's very exciting as you look at the things he presses here, because he's going to force people to decide whether he is a deceiver sent from hell, or whether he is a psychotic who is an egomaniac and has deceived himself into thinking that he's God, or he's going to bring them to see that he must be who he claims to be. God manifest in the flesh, the promised Messiah, the Son of God. Now those are the only three possibilities that Jesus leaves to anyone because of what he said, what he did, and what he claimed. He claimed to be God who stepped out of eternity into time and took upon himself a true human nature without ceasing to be God. And those two natures, God and man, were inseparably united forever. So in chapters 5 and 6, the heat is turned up because he begins to make claims that no one can make unless he truly is God. All right, let's look now at some of the things that he does here. Look at verse 1. After these things, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Most likely, this was the Passover, because that was a feast that every godly Jew had to go to Jerusalem to celebrate. So Jesus not only kept up with the requirements of Judaism, but he loved to do the things that the Bible said that they should do. So he goes up to Jerusalem. Now, I want you to notice something else, and this is not customary with Jesus. Usually, we saw in chapters 1 through 4, Jesus goes with his disciples to places, doesn't he? Or didn't he? But now he doesn't. He goes alone. He goes alone to Jerusalem, and he goes, it says in verse 2, now there is in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porticos. All right, he goes by himself, he seeks out a very specific place. Now, those who've been with me to Israel, we always go over there. We know where the thing is today. It's, the city's been destroyed so many times and the ruins poured over, and then they build on top of that the pool of Bethesda is way down below the level of the ruins today. But you can still see it, and you can see some of the columns that was part of that pool. And it's very interesting. You remember, John, more than any other gospel writer, keeps up with, he uses numbers that have symbolic meaning. The Bible has very definite symbolic meaning numbers, and he uses that frequently. We saw the 2 days last time, didn't we? All right, this time he talks about this being the pool of Bethesda with 5 porticos. What does the number 5 stand for in the Bible? It's consistently used with a concept. Grace. 5 is the number of grace, and it's aptly used here as a symbol. So he goes to the pool of Bethesda. In Hebrew, the pool of Bethesda means the pool of mercy. And so he goes to the pool of Bethesda where there are 5 porticos. Now, what are porticos? What existed there was, they had arches and 5 beautiful columns that supported those arches, and in between those areas were 5 porches. And then it gets to be something that tugs at your heart, because in verse 3 it says, and in these 5 porches lay a multitude. And the evidence is it was at least 100 people, maybe more. In these lay a multitude of those who were sick, blind, lame, and withered. Now, in most of the good texts of the New Testament, what follows is not in the text. In other words, it was something that apparently was added later. There is in brackets in the original Greek what follows after that. So I'll read what's in brackets. It says, waiting for the moving of the waters. In other words, all of these people in such hopeless conditions are waiting for the moving of the waters. Now, the writers, especially John, they wanted us to understand why they would be there lying around this pool waiting. Why would they come there? Well, he seeks to explain here, or whoever added this, seeks to explain the superstition that they believed that caused them to come and wait here in this place. And I'll get to that in just a moment, but I want to look at this. This is the most pathetic thing. You have to remember, you know, in our day, we've got these, golly, how many television programs are about doctors and about ER, the emergency room, the Grey's Anatomy, Lord in heaven. And all of these medically based pictures today. And of course, in our experience, we think, you know, people who are sick and they're lame and they're blind and all that, they're kind of hanging around someplace where they at least get some kind of medical help. In those days, there wasn't anything like that. I mean, if you were suffering from some ailment, you were just, it was hopeless. I mean, no one took care of you. Maybe some member of the family would sometime, but most of the time they wouldn't. And in Israel, it was even worse because the Pharisees had the theory that if you're sick, what did you do to deserve it? You know? And so they, instead of thinking, well, whatever they did, I feel sorry for them and try to comfort them, they didn't. They'd say, as we'll see when we get to John chapter 9, the blind man there, even the disciples were asking Jesus, and they were debating, wonder what this guy did to deserve to be born blind. Was it his sin or his parents' sin? So, you see, they all philosophize about that, and so there wasn't a lot of sympathy in those days. Well, this is where Jesus comes alone to Jerusalem and seeks out and goes there. He had another appointment. He had the eternal appointment with the woman of Samaria. Well, he's got another appointment now. And so I want to talk just for a moment about the description of this scene. It's heart-rending. There was this great multitude of those who were sick. The word sick is asthenia, or the word that is used is, instead of being a noun, it is a preposition. And it is a present passive participle. And the significance of that, you know, I'm not trying to impress you with grammar, but all of this has significance. You could have used a noun, but instead, John, through the guidance of the Holy Spirit, used a verb, a participle, a present participle, which means something that continues, and it's passive voice, which means it is done to those people. In other words, it's saying that they were desperately, they had become desperately sick. And it's interesting that the word asthenia, the root of it means to be weak. And you see, in the ancient world, they considered all sickness to be a weakness of the body. And today, after we've run the whole circle and called it everything else, we begin to realize sickness is a weakness of the body, because it means your immune system has broken down. And so these people, though, were in desperate condition. They were all very sick. And this was continuous. So they were not just people with a temporary case of the flu. Now, it says they were also blind. And it says also that there were the lame. This means to be crippled. There were people in various states of being crippled, and all of them severely crippled, some for a very long time. And the last word is even the most heartrending. Zeron, which means withered like a tree. In other words, some of them had been sick so long that the life-giving force was going out of them. They were like a tree dried up and becoming shriveled and bent over like a limb that is dying. And so it was the most hopeless, pitiful situation that you can imagine. And that's where Jesus determined to go. Now, about the brackets. Now, it says all of this group were waiting. By the way, after withered, there's a period, and there's a bracket that should be after that, beginning with the word waiting, and the bracket should go all the way down to the end of verse 4. And like I say, in the original manuscripts, the best evidence for the best manuscripts do not have this. But I believe that it was good that they put it in here, because I believe whoever did this, whoever added this, did it so that we could understand why these people were waiting at this place. In other words, there'd have to be some reason for them to be there. They wouldn't just go and lie around a pool. So there had to be something that drew them there. And this is the most heartless thing of all. All right, let's read it. The brackets. Waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred up the water. And whoever then first after the stirring up of the water stepped into it was made well from whatever disease with which he was afflicted. Now they all believed this, and that's why they came there. There's no evidence that anybody was ever healed, but that's what they believed. Now you see how heartless this is? This is, to me, this is a perfect picture of religion. You see, they believed this superstition, that if they could just get to the water first after it's stirred, they'd be healed. And so they were putting their trust in this kind of a religious superstition. And of course, the way it's heartless is, let's say you were one that was so crippled you'd never be able to get there first. So by this standard, it would only be the one that wasn't that far gone who would still be able to beat everybody to the pool. So it never worked for the one that was really crippled, huh? You see, this is, to me, I think John is painting a picture here, and I think that this was allowed to be part of the text, that John is allowing a picture to be painted here, that religion is like that. Religion promises man that if he can just be good enough, he'll be saved. And so people strive to try to be good enough for God to accept. But if you're trying to be accepted by God on that basis, you never have any assurance that you're good enough. Especially if you know the Bible at all. Because James chapter 2 verse 10 says, whosoever keeps the whole law yet offends in one point is guilty of all of it. So this means you could try to keep the law, and maybe you do pretty well for a while, and then you break one little part of the law, and boom, you're lost. That's what religion offers to man. And that's what the Pharisees offered to the people. What a hopeless picture, huh? So all of the people that were there, their hope was based in a hopeless myth that they could never, ever live up to or claim. All right, now let's go on. And a certain man was there who had been 38 years in his sickness. This man was hopelessly crippled. And he'd been that way for 38 years. Do you know what happens to a person that's really crippled and he can't get around? You know what happens to a person in 38 years of that? The muscles shorten. The sinews dry up and begin to shorten. The ligaments begin to get entangled and draw up. And you know what? Jesus latches on to him because he was the most hopeless of them all. And that's the one he picks. Why? Well, let's find out. And when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time in that condition. How do you know that? Well, he knows all things. See, this is part of the spiritual gift that was brought over from his deity, and God gave him this gift in his humanity. So he knew it. And so he knew this man. He knew he knew all about him, as we'll see in a moment. And that's the one he picks, and he goes over to him. And I want you to notice something. He asked him a question that on first glance looks like a foolish question. Now, I don't know the Lord never would do that, but at first, when you consider it, sounds almost foolish. Let me translate from the original what he really said. So it says, when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been a long time in that condition, he said to him, "Do you want to get well?" You see why I say it almost sounds foolish? Do you want to get well? Well, Jesus asked that because he wants that man to say what it is that he's been trusting that someday might heal him, and shift his focus from that to him personally. Besides all that, he wanted everyone that was sick there to hear this. Because you see, when Jesus wants others to have faith, he picks out the most hopeless person and does something with them. And then they look at that and they say, well, if he could do that with them, he could do it with me. So he's seeking to shift this man. Now listen to this man. He says, in verse 7, the sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I'm coming, another steps down before me." See how hopeless religion is. And so what is he saying here? Does this man have faith? Absolutely not. He doesn't have any faith. He is trusting in a myth, but, you know, his body is not the only thing that is hopeless and broken. His spirit and his hope is broken. And you see, all he could do was complain about what others couldn't do for him or wouldn't do for him. They wouldn't carry him over the water. So, you know, he was at the point of utter hopelessness. And he was trusting in the wrong thing. And I really want you to get this because, you know, I listen to all of these healing specialists on television. And they give the idea, if you just have faith, God will heal you. Not necessarily. there's a little thing we need to put in there. Yes, he will and he can, and he does today, if it's his will. But that's a little phrase no one wants to put in there today. Now, so this man is not expressing any faith. He's already dejected. All he's doing is telling what he can't do and what others won't do for him. And now Jesus takes over sovereignly. Jesus said to him, and I want you to get every word of this as it is in the original. First word Jesus says is ageri. It's in the aorist tense. It's in the imperative mood, active voice. Okay? Now what that means, aorist means staccato. It means something that instant when it's used with the imperative mood. And instant in a moment of time, the imperative mood means it's a command. And the active voice means you better do it.
Join us next week for the continuation of Hal Lindsey's Bible study of the Book of John.
But when you really get a grip on the fact that Jesus so saves you, when you simply admit your sins and receive the gift of pardon, that you are already in heaven as far as he's concerned. As I prepared for this week's program, I was again struck by the speed with which events are moving into the scenario the prophets predicted for the end times. I believe we're there. People on the street are talking about what all of these things mean. Folks that wouldn't darken the door of a church or pick up a Bible are now very curious. This may be our greatest opportunity, maybe even our last opportunity, to share the gospel of Jesus Christ before we're silenced by political correctness. The message that God has given me is more important now than it's ever been, for the church and for the nation. That's why I'm asking you to help me to expand our reach.
You can find more of Hal Lindsey at his website, www.hallindsey.com. There you can access our video and article archives. Visit our online store for Hal Lindsey CDs, books, and other specialty items. To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.